Variations for a squat. Squats are great. Squats are a functional movement. If we ever have seen small children, a lot of times in a healthy small child, they'll naturally and instinctively just go down in a squat. But of course in life, as we get older, we lose that ability. And then you might start to do a yoga practice and go to classes and the teacher's like, just come into a squat. And your body goes, just come into a what? This isn't gonna work for me. And then you're left feeling maybe uninspired and unempowered. So hopefully this series of options to get into a squat that's healthy and right for your body will make you feel more empowered. Now, what you want to do, and this is where props are just so wonderful, is that they help you feel supported. And because really a squat asks us to do a lot of things. A squat is requiring deep hip mobility. A squat requires us deep ankle mobility and strength. And it's not really, again, as we know, not super available for most people. So the first and easiest and quickest fix and support for a squat, excuse me, is to use blocks or something underneath your heels. So I have 2 yoga blocks. I also have a blanket. You can use a rolled up yoga mat. So in fact, you can just, even if you only have 1 yoga mat, roll up the yoga mat that you're using if you have no other props, or you can use a bolster. Now I'm going to start with the, excuse me, we're going to Goldilocks this, where that means we're going to try different things and we're going to see which one feels just right. So you can try, let's do it actually before and after here. First thing we're going to do is experiment, and I know you might not be warmed up or anything like that, which is fine. What does your squat feel like today? How low can you go without hurting yourself? So feet. And we're not going to get too picky in this class about how the feet and legs should be. Just kind of find a natural, instinctive spot. So for most people, that means the toes are going to go out a little bit and your feet will be a little bit wider than hip width apart. We all have different femur bone shapes, lengths, pelvis shapes, so that's going to affect our squat. So for this case, we're going to just play around with what feels right for us. Toes not necessarily forward, toes a little bit out to the side. And then you're going to lower down. And then there might be a point as you start to lower down where you can't really lower anymore. And the only way to get down is to lift the heels. So if that's the case, that's great. Notice the spot though. So notice the point where you want to lower down and you can't go anymore. Stay there and pause. If you lower down, and go all the way down, that's great, stay there, but notice how it all feels, okay? So just notice where it's at. If you're doing this variation, you're actually gonna get some good leg work, and then come out of that. So that's our before, how does that feel? Now let's take our rolled up towel or folded blanket. This is not very thick, it's just folded once or twice, so it will only provide a little bit of lift over on the heels. So let's try that. Place your feet into that squat position with just a little bit lift underneath your heels. Does that change? Can you go a little further? If you go all the way down, do you feel like it's actually maybe a little bit easier to hold? Okay, try that, come out of that, but let's bring the heels up even higher. So I'm going to fold my blanket in half, and that lifts and creates an even bigger lift for the heels, and then try it out. When you come into the squat, it's all about shifting the hips back. Don't be shy, stick that butt out. How low can you go? The goal in a squat is not how low can you go, as if that's going to make you a better person if you can get into a full squat. All I'm saying is, has it changed? Does lifting the heels allow you to get a little bit lower? Okay, come out of that. Great. Let's try something bigger now. So I'm going to move this, and I'm going to move on to the bolster. You may not have all these props, so feel free to get creative with what you do have and see if there's something else around your house that you can do. So now this is definitely bringing my heels a lot higher. And feels way more comfortable. Do you see what's really happening? If I took the bolster out of this, I'm in that toe balance position. So do you see how if you were someone who at the very beginning, the only way that you could get lower into the squat was to lift the heels? Well, that's what we're doing. With using blocks and lifting something underneath the heels, we're meeting our body where it's at. And the feeling of connection through the heels now, through something supportive, is actually really supportive for the nervous system. Okay, come out of that if you haven't already. Now the next one, I have these really thick blocks. Your yoga blocks may not be quite as big here, and that's just fine. These might be too big. Whew, yeah, that's, I'm definitely I feel like I'm wearing high heels here. So I'm really high on my tiptoes, coming down into that squat. And there, yeah. So I'm going to decide, for me, and I want you to decide what works for you, and see if you can put whichever one. I kind of liked the double folded blanket for me. You choose your adventure. And then let's go again. So find that spot where, hover low. But you're not necessarily doing this so that you can get all the way down. Find that position, because sometimes your knees are not going to help, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment. Sometimes this is not happy on the knees to go deep into this bend. Okay, coming up. So what would be another variation? Well, I like to use a bolster, and this is going to be tricky too. Sometimes if you have a rounder circular bolster, it's going to be a lot harder where we're about to go. So watch and see what we have and what's happening, and then you can get to determine what's going to work. But I'm going to place my heels onto my support here. I'm going to take my bolster behind my knees, and then I'm going to sit back like so. So it's a little bit different. So you can see if I had a big, thick, round bolster, it might work, it might not. It might actually just pop out behind you, which is okay. But if you play with this, some people actually really love just having that gap between the knees and make sitting into this squat a little bit more supportive. I can support the strength in my ankles a little bit more. It still work. It's not like it's easy and I can just sit here for 5 hours. There's still definite effort, but I'm not going. And see how much of a knee flexion difference that is? We created this much space. So what you could also do is, if you don't have a bolster, but you still absolutely put something underneath your knees, underneath your heels. I'm going to roll this up again, and you can use your rolled blanket and towel, and let's experiment and see how this feels. Interesting. It works. Again, don't do this and feel like it's like, so for me, because it's a firmer blanket, it's putting that extra pressure on the calves and hamstrings, and it's a little tender, but for me, it's not a bad tender. It's just more of like that. If I was rolling out my calves with the ball, it's like that kind of self-massage feeling. Not necessarily relaxing, but not terrible. But what's amazing about this is that that might be the key to your knees. You might find, oh, finally I can go into a deeper squat because there's now space in my knees. I don't need to go into that big deep flexion. So there you go. Wait a second. I almost forgot. So those are some ways to get into more of an active squat. But here's another one that I quite love. Sometimes it's doing a squat. Might be a little precarious for some of us, so be careful if you're using yoga blocks that are thin, 2 of them balanced. But I'm using this because you can use if you have children, you might have, like young children, you might have little kid stools and little kid chairs that actually work really well for a bolster. So can you see that this is also a squat as well? The shape of my thighs, right there, my knees, my pelvis, I've got the hip flexion, I've got the angle here. I'm still doing a squat. It's not active, I'm not strengthening in the same way, but I'm prepping my hip joints and my legs to be able to feel more comfortable. So this is a beautiful squat alternative. You could even play with bringing that down a little bit more. If that feels okay in your body, you can experiment with sitting in a squat like this, and I actually recommend doing it in your everyday life. If you have a little yoga block or a small stool, sit like this more often so that your body is in a more relaxed, passive sort of way to get you used to being in the squat position, so that one day maybe you can work on the strength and mobility to hold yourself there. All right, one last thing too, you could, same with the knees, experiment while you're sitting here. You can tuck that in and then place it so I'm kind of hooking it into the back of my knees. Ooh, I kind of like that. And then what I like about this is that I'm pressing the heels down. We're going to make it a little bit more active. I'm pressing the heels down, and I'm actually ever so slightly pulling my thighs away from each other. I'm gently squeezing the blanket, and I'm pulling the blanket apart with my thighs. So it's a little bit of activity here. We don't want it so engaged that your hip flexors overly work and take over. So this is a gentle engagement. Feet gently pressing down. You can read your book. Look at the beautiful trees in your yard as you sit like this. And this is a beautiful, nice alternative for an active squat. Another variation that you can do in the more seated squat is to take your towel or blanket, fold it like so, and then put it in the crease of your thighs. And sitting up onto your sit bones as best you can in that crease of your thighs, bring your legs in. And just like having something behind the knees, having something that's offering a little bit of spaciousness in the hip flexors can feel kind of comforting. In fact, I really like this because my belly can relax, and it gives me a little bit of a like loving seatbelt feeling. So there's a different benefit for that too. It actually just gives a nice easefulness when holding a more relaxed squat, supported squat position.